Okay, so I'll go ahead and start with roll call. Commissioner Avila, Commissioner Estradas, Commissioner Grimmig,
Present.
Commissioner Hisarick, Commissioner Cato.
President, I have another obligation, so I have to leave at 7:30. I'm sorry. I just want to let you know.
Okay. Commissioner Kalfani, Commissioner Mandel,
Present.
Commissioner Pack, Commissioner Shannon, Commissioner Sirota.
Present.
Okay, so we have 2, 3, 4, 5 present. We do not have a quorum.
Thank you. Seeing that we don't have a quorum, we'll shift the agenda. I welcome the people of the City of Los Angeles to the May 9th meeting of the LA City Health Commission. And I welcome Professor Rob Jackson, who's Professor of Earth System Science Department, as well as the Senior Fellow of the Woods Institute for the Environment, as well as a Senior Fellow for the Precourt Institute of Energy at Stanford University, and the Chair of the Global Carbon Project to do his presentation. Professor Jackson, we're honored that you take time from your busy schedule to join us today, and I'm thrilled to look forward to your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Mandel, and thank you all for inviting me. I thank you for your work as well. So I will share my screen briefly. Let me know if that doesn't display properly. Hi again, my name is Rob Jackson. I'm a professor at Stanford. I'm grateful for your time and attention today. And I want to talk about gas appliances in homes and buildings, greenhouse gas emissions, and indoor air pollution generated by those appliances in our homes and buildings. I want to acknowledge my students and colleagues on the paper that just came out. I'll talk about Eric LaBelle, Colin Finnegan, and Zutao Yang, and many other people who've helped contribute to this work. What I'll do today is just take a few minutes and discuss very briefly greenhouse gas emissions for carbon dioxide and methane, the two gases we'll look into during my presentation. And then later in the presentation, we'll look at nitrogen dioxide and other indoor air pollutants that are generated as well. So I'll begin with a quick overview of why climate action is needed. And gas appliances are a major source. Natural gas use is a major source of both carbon dioxide and methane to the atmosphere. This is a plot of fossil carbon dioxide emissions from power plants and cars and fossil infrastructure like that over the last 30 years or so. This is work that my colleague Pierre Friedlingstein led at the Global Carbon Project. And you see that last year in 2021, the world generated about 36 billion tons of fossil carbon pollution. That sawtooth you see from 2020 to 21 is of course the effect of COVID-19, where we stopped driving and many other things in 2020. But last year, as the economy came back, emissions roared back essentially to where they were in 2019. So we can't expect the COVID crisis to bail us out of the climate problem. The one thing to remember is that fossil carbon emissions need to be zero. They don't need to be flat on this figure. They need to be down at zero for the Earth to have a stable and safe climate. So we have a lot of work to do, and emissions are almost 60% higher than they were in 1990, 3 decades ago. So that's a brief update on carbon dioxide. Here's a figure for methane concentrations in the atmosphere. This is work from NOAA, the federal agency. And methane's rising even faster than carbon dioxide on a relative basis. Maybe the most surprising thing is that the last 2 years, methane concentrations have risen the most over the past 40 or 50 years. We've had record increases, and we're still trying to sort out why that is. It wasn't that COVID-19 decreased the activities associated with methane emissions. It's possible that reductions in NOx gases and other things in air pollution decrease the natural scrubbing of methane. So it may not have been less emissions, it may have been less destruction of methane. So anyway, methane's gone up 16 or 17 parts per billion in the last couple of years, record increases. One of the things that we work on in my lab is to reduce methane emissions and leakage around the world. We do this from helicopters filming. We drive cities to map leaks and we take measurements from buildings and in homes. I'll give you just a couple of quick examples of the approaches that we use. Here is a video from a site in Texas. We flew 8,000 wells around the world randomly. I refer to these as a restaurant inspection. What you're seeing here from the helicopter is a plume of gas leaking from the top of a tank at this site in Texas. There's a road to the right. That plume would be invisible if you were in your car. It's only visible with a special infrared camera. And there's a house at the top of this figure. And so you can imagine that if the wind changed direction and blew upwards in this image, that plume would pass across the house and the people in that residence. So we found these kinds of leaks not all the time. They're not normal, but anywhere from 1 in 10 to 1 in 100 sites of the places that we showed up from the air unannounced. We've also done a lot of work in cities. This was the first public map of natural gas leaks. I did this with my colleague Nathan Phillips in Boston University. This is a map of Boston. Each red line on this figure is a road that we drove like a lawnmower back and forth across the city. And each yellow spike is a leak in the natural gas distribution system. The number one predictor of a leak in Boston was old cast iron piping. Some of these pipes have been underground for more than a century. And I should note that Boston is not Los Angeles. Los Angeles is a much newer city, and I would not expect 4 leaks per mile as we saw in Boston and Washington, D.C. and older northeastern cities. And ideally, we like to try and accomplish things that help people and the companies involved. So when our Boston paper came out, the mayor of Boston at that time, Tom Menino, wrote a letter to the Department of Public Utilities, urging them to step up scrutiny of leaks. Then Congressman, now Senator Markey, wrote a letter to the federal agency PHMSA, suggesting the same thing. And best of all, Massachusetts the next year passed an accelerated pipeline replacement bill that allowed companies to recover costs to repair and replace these old pipes faster than they would have been able to do. Not just helping the climate, but making the distribution system safer, because every one of those yellow spikes is a potential source of explosion, even though such explosions are really rare. We accomplished the same thing in Washington, D.C. when we mapped about 6,000 leaks there. There, the utility and the groups passed project pipes that did the same thing and accelerated the replacement of that old infrastructure. So in some cases, this is really an infrastructure problem. Let me turn now to the topic for tonight, which is the gas used in our homes and how much of that is getting to the air for greenhouse gases, but also indoor air pollutants generated in the flames. We published this paper a couple of years ago on natural gas water heaters. And you can see that we're trying to quantify in these studies both the carbon dioxide emissions that happen when the gas is burned. There's not any way to capture that carbon dioxide, but then we're also measuring the amount of methane or natural gas that's leaking from the appliances uncombusted. So that's the spirit of what I'll show you in the next couple of slides. And this is just a figure of methods. We use special laser-based instruments to measure methane and carbon dioxide. You can see that silver tube to the left, which is like a vacuum cleaner sucking up the exhaust from, in this case, an on-demand or tankless water heater on the side of a house. Well, what do we see when we take these kinds of measurements? Here's an example of what we see, a typical methane plot for water heaters. We have to measure what we call the steady state off emissions. These are small leaks that are happening all the time because of loose couplings or fittings. So there's a slow bleed of methane or natural gas into the air all the time. Then every time an appliance kicks on, there's a brief period of time. There's also the on emissions. When the flame kicks on, there's a certain amount, a small percentage of the natural gas that isn't burned. That methane or gas leaks into the air. But then we also need to think about the on and off pulses. Every time an appliance turns on, there's a brief period of time or delay before the gas lights with the flame. And you kind of know this most intuitively at a stovetop where you flip the burner, it just takes a split second to kick on. So there's a peak of emissions when that happens. There's another pulse of emissions when the appliance turns off. So we have to measure all of these things, the steady state off emissions, the efficiency of the burn, and these pulses that happen every time they kick on and off to understand the climate impacts of different gas appliances. Well, this is what we found for water heaters. These are methane emissions per water heater on the left. For storage or big tank water heaters, the emissions were dominated by these steady state off rates. They're small, but the appliance is off most of the time, so they dominate the full amount. And for water heaters, this emission came mostly from pilot lights that don't quite combust all of the methane that keeps them lit. And then these on-demand or tankless water heaters, like you see more typically in Europe, were dominated by these on-off pulses because they kick on and off many more times in a typical day than the storage tank water heaters do. When you put the methane emissions together with the carbon dioxide emissions, you get a picture that looks like this. So we can add the carbon dioxide from the burn on top of these methane emissions. And in this case, the storage tank water heaters are still worse for climate than these on-demand water heaters because they're less efficient in terms of the gas that they use. So they burn more natural gas because they're keeping a big tank of water lit all the time. Hot all the time. But the tankless water heaters are a little bit worse for gas leakage, but still better for climate overall because you're only lighting the water and heating the water on demand. Well, let me switch now to stoves, which is where I want to emphasize most of the talk today, and I'll try and finish quickly. We published this paper earlier this year in 2022. We looked at natural gas stoves, cooktops, and ovens in homes. A lot of coverage for this work, some of it around the spirit of the New York Times article on the left, that your stove leaks gas even when it's off, was a common headline. The Washington Post article delved more into the climate impacts and the potential health impacts that I'll cover here in a minute. So we'll look at both of these things briefly. Well, here's a typical trace of what you see with a stove. This is a concentration profile through time, left to right, methane on top, carbon dioxide in the middle in blue, and NOx, the pollutant, in light green. So you see that when the appliance is off under steady state off conditions, there's no carbon dioxide or NOx gas generated. Those lines are flat. And that's because they only are formed when the flame is on. But methane's not like that. You see this positive upward slope for methane even when the appliance is off. That's the steady state off term that I mentioned before. So even when the appliance is just sitting there unused in the home, there's this slow bleed of methane to the atmosphere. When the appliance turns on, there's a pulse of methane into the air. That's the delay of lighting. And then you see the initiation of carbon dioxide and NOx pollution with these slopes linearly trending upwards from that point on. Steady state on period, those emissions are pretty linear. Some appliances actually burn a little methane or natural gas from the air. And then when they kick back off, you see a big peak of methane again, and you no longer see emissions of carbon dioxide or NOx gases. So that's a very typical profile for a range or cooktop. You see something similar for ovens in this case, same gases we looked at. And here now you see the oven cycling. So there are periods of time when the oven is, once it's up to temperature where there's no additional carbon dioxide or NOx generated because it's just stationary. And then when it starts to have a temperature drop, the burner kicks on again and you get a cycle. So that's on again and then off briefly, on again. But this whole time the methane is building up because you have these pulses. Every time it switches on and off, you get this additional methane released into the air unburned, plus what's uncombusted in the flames. When we put the greenhouse gas consequences of this together, it looks like this. The methane or natural gas that leaks into the air adds about 40% of emissions on top of the carbon dioxide. So just as for water heaters, the greenhouse gas component is dominated by the CO2 emissions simply from burning the gas. But then on top of that, we have additional warming from the methane or natural gas leaking into the air. Let me switch gears now and look at NOx pollution, and I'll spend the rest of my time on this. NOx pollution is made of NO2, nitrogen dioxide, and NO. These add together to form NOx. I think most people are familiar with the idea of NOx in city air. The sources of NOx in our environment come from lightning, cars predominantly, and also appliances or flames like those in our home. And NOx gases are generated at high temperatures, which is what you're seeing in this figure during combustion. Well, this is what we find for NOx and nitrogen dioxide formation in stoves in people's home. You see a direct linear relationship with the amount of gas burned and the amount of NOx formed in the air that we measure. This is, again, these gases are only formed while the flames are burning, while they're on. And the more gas you use, whether you turn a burner up or turn on two burners, the more NOx pollution you generate. You see a profile that looks like this. These are numbers from an actual kitchen that we did. And this was turning the oven on to 350 degrees, a relatively mild temperature. You see NOx generated when the oven turns on. The blue line is nitrogen dioxide. It's the gas we worry most about in terms of indoor air quality. It's a respiratory irritant. It can trigger asthma, coughing, and wheezing. There is no indoor standard for nitrogen dioxide gas, but there is an outdoor standard that the EPA recognizes of 100 parts per billion for about an hour's time. And we see that 100 part per billion surpassed regularly in homes within a few minutes of stoves turning on. And it depends on ventilation and how big your kitchen is and many things. I'll come to that in a minute. But the point of this figure is that even under normal usage, just a burner at a time or an oven at a modest temperature, we can surpass thresholds of concern for NO2 concentrations in quite a short period of time in homes. Well, I'll finish up here just with a couple more slides. Here's where we're going with this work, and some of these newer studies might be of interest. We're trying to understand emissions for all appliances in homes and buildings, furnaces, water heaters, gas fireplaces and such, to understand the full greenhouse gas consequences of gas usage in our homes and buildings. We're particularly focusing on lower income residences now. So I was in Bakersfield last week with our team. We're working in poorer communities and trailer parks, for example, where I think, or I would expect the exposure to be worse. Those kitchens tend to be smaller, perhaps to have poor ventilation. So I'm very interested in the potential environmental justice impacts of this issue. I think poorer people bear the brunt more so than people like myself who have sort of a larger kind of open kitchen plan. We're also measuring other indoor air pollutants, carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, and VOCs, volatile organic carbon compounds. We're looking at commercial kitchens now where stoves and ranges might be on long periods of time consecutively with people working in those conditions and may have very different ventilation depending on the place. We're working with the EPA to try and fully account for greenhouse gas emissions. We're also working with the med school at Stanford and elsewhere on the health consequences and electrification interventions. So taking measurements before and after people in homes are electrified. We're comparing electric stoves and cooktops to gas for reasons I'll come to in a second. And of course, we're after more houses. So let me finish with some criticism. I want to try and be forthright about what people have said about our study. And here are some direct quotes from an editorial, a paid editorial that came out in the Washington Times. And the quote, for those of you who can't see the slides, is, for example, what is being cooked is often the predominant source of emissions rather than how you cook it. Since a major source of emissions in your kitchen is the food you cook, replacing your gas stove with electric will do very little to address indoor air quality or health. And I categorically disagree with this conclusion. There is a grain of truth in this when you're looking at particulates. And there are conditions where the cooking of the food can generate more particulates than the flames do, but that's not true for NOx gases. This is the most comprehensive study that I've been able to find. It was a study commissioned by the California Air Resources Board in 2001. It was published. And what they did was use a test kitchen to compare and prepare the same meals under gas stoves and electric. And that's the numbers that you see in the middle of the slide. So first of all, when the oven clean cycle came on, the nitrogen dioxide concentrations got above 400 parts per billion. That's 4 times the EPA standard for outdoor conditions. So you do not want to be standing in your kitchen when your oven clean cycle is on. But notice for the electric oven, that was not true at all. The rise in NO2 was only about 35 parts per billion. So that difference between them, gas minus electric, was 377 parts per billion. That's a lot. And for all of these comparisons, in fact, except 1 or 2, the gas stove had higher concentrations, higher emissions, and the difference between gas and electric was usually higher than the sum of electric and the food emissions. So based on the data in controlled conditions, same exact meals cooked with gas and electric, it's not about the food, it's about the fuel primarily. So there was another quote, this body of research points less to the costly and drastic measure of replacing your gas appliances and more to ensuring proper ventilation in your kitchen. That's true whether you use a gas cooktop or an electric one. And ventilation is, of course, absolutely critical for health-related exposures. The interesting thing is that surveys show people turn on their ventilation hoods only about 1/3 of the time. So thus, hoods being off is the normal working condition for people cooking. That's partly because they're noisy. People just don't like them. And as I've already said, I expect people in lower income neighborhoods to face the greatest risk because their kitchens are smaller and their ventilation hoods may not function as well. What we said in our paper that the gas the stove is unique in that all the other gas appliances in our home, we require the pollution to be emitted to the outdoor air. Think of your furnace or your water heater. We don't allow that pollution to enter directly into our homes. And yet we stand directly over our stoves without a vent mandated. And we breathe that pollution. But we wouldn't stand over the exhaust of a car, for example, from a tailpipe. And the stoves don't have catalytic converters the way cars do. So the stove really is introducing pollutants directly into the air that we breathe. The data about people not using their hoods come from the two studies down below. So I just want to include those references. These are work of other people, and I just want them there so people can look that up for themselves. So not using their hoods is normal for most people. And then finally, this was probably the biggest criticism of our work, that we use plastic to sort of enclose kitchens. The quote here, "It's useful to note how the measurements were taken. The researchers sealed their test kitchen in plastic tarps to concentrate the emissions so they would be easier to measure. While this is a novel and interesting method, the study results are useless for evaluating health-based exposures because no kitchen is set up like that. In other words, they weren't simulating a real-life cooking experience." So let me explain why we did this. We were interested in measuring emission factors, the rate of methane, NOx, and carbon dioxide emitted per unit time and gas burn. When you have emission factors, you can then use models, and health professionals can look at different kitchen sizes, different ventilation rates. So it isn't that the study results are useless for evaluating health-based exposures. It's that these are the most important numbers that we can get from these studies. And yes, we're of course interested in what the concentrations actually are that people reach in their homes, but our study was about understanding the rate of gases emitted. And we did that with plastic in some cases to get to a known controlled volume that we could measure, and also to partition, especially the very large open kitchen plans that made it much harder for us to measure. So we didn't generally measure the actual concentrations in a real life situation. That part of the study of the criticism is true in the sense that you wouldn't want to make the volume smaller and then say that's the normal exposure. But what we found is that these emission factors lead to dangerous levels of nitrogen dioxide, even in kitchens that were untented, like that one I showed you just a few minutes ago, where there was no plastic or closing off of that kitchen that got above very quickly 100 parts per billion. So I want to thank you for your attention and thank you for your work. And I'm happy to take questions or listen to any comments. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for your excellent presentation. I truly appreciate it. Vice President Grimick, you have a question.
Yeah, no, this is a fantastic presentation. I've been really interested in this topic since I started becoming aware of it about 2 years ago. My question is, it sounds like you're working on this, but are you aware of any studies, or has anyone looked at the direct health effects of this, like your stove and cooktop, and what that leads to currently and long term?
I would say that I'm not personally measuring that myself, but I am working with the med school here at Stanford to combine some of those studies with the interventions that I mentioned, taking appliances out. Most of the work, I would say, has focused on the occurrence of asthma in homes, and in some cases correlations between the presence of gas appliances and stoves in homes and the frequency of asthma that occurs. So I would say the link with asthma is the most well-studied and best understood. And of course, it doesn't happen all the time. There are other factors, other sources of pollution in people's lives, but the relationships between asthma and gas use are pretty strong in the literature.
Okay. And do you feel I have a gas stove and I cook regularly. I love cooking. Do you feel that the hood being on, which I use anytime it's on, have you shown how much that alleviates the pollutants in the air versus not having it on?
Now, that's a great question. That's something we're measuring right now by doing traces with the hoods on and without. The hoods are really interesting, though, beyond the fact that most people don't like to use them. If you look carefully, once you start working on a subject, you notice things that I wouldn't have noticed before. And if you notice in many apartments and homes, the hoods don't always vent to the outdoors. Some of them are just mixing the air back into the kitchen, but they're diluting it in the kitchen air. And so I think hoods that don't vent to the outdoors also will reduce the pollution less. And some places when they retrofit it, if there isn't a vent to the outdoors, they don't like to push a hole through the wall and put ducting into it. It's more expensive. So again, lower income residences where there isn't a hood that vents to the outside, they're not really reducing the pollution. They're just spreading it throughout the room.
Okay, no, that's great. Thank you very much. And then one last question. I read in Europe, they are looking to either limit or ban gas stoves in homes. Is there anything in this country that is looking to do the same, or is there any legislation that's looking to help minimize effects or anything along those lines?
Of course, the most common change that's being debated are the REACH codes that would mandate electrification in the future. New York City passed a law recently, I believe, to mandate electrification in new construction by 2027. There have been 50 or so cities and counties in California that have done the same. I don't know of a jurisdiction in the U.S. that has mandated removal of gas appliances. That's a much trickier issue, obviously. But most of the changes have been through these REACH codes to mandate electrification. Those codes I support strongly because we're not locking greenhouse gas pollution into buildings and homes for decades to come, and we're cleaning up people's air and making their environment safer.
Okay, great. No, thank you. This was very, very informative. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Councilor Vaughn, you have a question?
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, for a wonderful presentation. I'm interested in the fact when the CARB study you said was 2001 or so, and I'm interested especially now with potentially more people staying in their homes and working from their homes, how that may affect health-wise, because before you could cook and then leave, and I'm not sure how long the gases stay within the home, but now with people working in their homes, staying in their homes and telecommuting, I'm interested to see if, probably not now, over a certain period of time, if you or your colleagues are going to look at potentially with that change in work, if any health effects that result.
That's a really great question. We are trying to do longer time courses of NOx and other gases in the homes, not just in the kitchens, but gas spreads into bedrooms and other parts of the home and building too. I think it goes beyond that. You're right. That's a really good observation. And we're staying home more, but there are other changes happening too. We're making our homes tighter and more energy efficient, and that means they exchange air less often. So there's another reason to expect that those concentrations may increase in the future, because as we use more and more insulation and reduce airflow and air exchange with the outside, you expect those concentrations to build up more too. So we haven't looked at working as something that we're studying, the effects of people staying home more, but I think that and the tighter homes for insulation both suggest that we may be breathing more from the indoor exposures than we would have in the past.
So I have a few questions. Thank you again for a concise and wonderful presentation. So one question that I have is, you talked about the hoods and the updrafts. There are also downdrafts that are also utilized oftentimes on stoves. Are those less effective or less efficient, or not? Do they not work at all for your purposes?
So I'll give you an answer that's more of an opinion based on our experience. I have not measured the flow rates from those hoods, but in general, I think they work less well than the ones that are overhead. And I know it's surprising the number of homes where people just no longer use their downdraft hoods. I was in a home just a couple of days ago where they had literally taken the ventilation out from under their hood because it disrupted the air pulling across the stove, disrupted the burn of their stove. So they literally just ripped it out and put a piece of plexiglass over the slot behind their range so that things wouldn't drop down that slot. So I don't think they work as well, and people like them even less than the overhead hoods.
Thank you. And then for the public record, I want to note that Commissioner Kalfani joined 2 minutes ago. So we now have quorum. Two other quick questions, Dr. Jackson. Is clearly commercial kitchens the stoves or ovens are on continuously. Are there any health studies on chefs or other kitchen workers? Do they have any increased health issues in relationship from these gases?
A great question. This is something we're trying to work on. I'm working with Stanford and some companies in the Bay Area to look at this. I feel like it's a bit like the homes I talked about earlier, where it would make a big difference whether it's the commercial kitchen at SpaceX or or Facebook, or whether it's a commercial kitchen in the basement of a building where people might be working in a small space, with relatively poor ventilation. But I don't know of any studies looking at exposure under those conditions. But I suspect that these small kitchens might not be as well ventilated, and that those people may see higher concentrations. There's one thing I didn't mention in my talk. Everything we did was one burner at a time. Like, we never put two burners on, and we always boiled the same pot of water, literally the same pot. But you can imagine what my student Eric suggested we do a study in the paper, what he called the Thanksgiving Day scenario, which was all 4 burners on and the oven. And we didn't do that because I didn't want to feel like, look like we had our thumb on the scale, if you will. But then lo and behold, I was over at a friend's house for Thanksgiving, and I look at their stove, and they had 4 burners in the oven on. And I thought, well, that's not such a crazy scenario. So everything I showed you was one burner at a time only, or one oven cycle at 350. So I do think commercial kitchens have some potential risks. I would expect the exposure to be greater in smaller and poor ventilated kitchens, of course.
The other thing is, I'm assuming these gases are lighter than air, so they will float up. So and correct me if I'm wrong, but if there's high-rise apartment buildings or condominiums or co-ops, such as in New York, buildings go up, 30, 40, 50, 60 stories. Have you done studies where you're measuring at different levels of height within multi-residential housing to see if there's a significantly increased amount of those 3 gases at different levels?
I have not looked at anything like that. I don't know of any studies that have done that. I wouldn't. NOx and carbon dioxide, for instance, are not really lighter than air. I think it's really not so much the density of the gas. It's more about the warm air rising and the vents and the mixture of air. So it's really about convection and bulk flow of air more than just the diffusive density movement. So I have not looked at that. It's an interesting idea.
And then the last one is, especially because Dr. Mass is going to be speaking on costs of healthcare and in pharmaceuticals, but she's actually a pediatrician, so I know pediatricians see the world through slightly different eyes, and that we know for a fact that young lungs are much more susceptible to irritants, and so are there studies that you've done or colleagues have done looking at kids under the age of 2, as well as preschool kids and just the pediatric population in general?
First of all, I would preface it by saying I'm not a medical doctor. And so that's why we're beginning to work with the doctors in the medical school here at Stanford. We have not looked at anything like exposure to really young children. There are other groups and experts around the country and the world that have done that and are doing that today. So it's not something that I'm doing personally in our studies. You can think of, I do think young kids in general are at risk. We're working with the Central California Asthma Collaborative for our partner in the Central Valley. They're helping us find homes in the towns like Bakersfield to measure. And you can think of another reason that, in my opinion, electric's better than gas. If you have a young child, they can't reach up and put their hand in a flame, or burner. You can't light your house on fire with an induction stove. So I think there are other benefits too.
Excellent, thank you. Any other commissioners have any questions? Seeing none, Professor Jackson, we're truly honored that you take time from your busy schedule to join us and help the people of the city of Los Angeles. You're welcome to stay on. We also recognize that you have a very full professional existence, and would not take it slight at all if you signed off. We do have some public business to do prior to Professor Mass's presentation. So you're welcome to stay. Thank you very much. What I would ask is in your partnership with this medical school at Stanford, if you find some interesting data over the next year or two, please let us know and send us the information, and we would love to potentially follow up on that.
Okay, well, thank you all for your time and for your work. And I will stay and listen to Dr. Mass's presentation. I'm looking forward to it.
Excellent, thank you. So for the city clerk, officially, can we get Commissioner Kalfani to just answer to the roll call?
Yes, Commissioner Kalfani.
Present.
Great, you have
Thank
a
you.
quorum. We have a quorum as of 6:34. And then I think we just need to take item 1 and then you can move forward.
Exactly. So and then so what we'll do is we'll do item 1. Can I have a motion concerning AB 361, and then we'll go to the neighborhood councils and public comment because we'll need to do that when we have maintain the quorum before Commissioner Cotto has to leave. So is there a motion for AB 361?
Yes.
Grimig, thank you.
I move that the Los Angeles City Health Commission determine, in accordance with AB 361, Section 3E3, that this legislative body has reconsidered the circumstances of the state of emergency, and that the state of emergency continues to directly impact the ability of the members to meet safely in person, and/or state or local officials continue to impose or recommend measures to promote social distancing.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
I can second.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalfani. Thank you, Commissioner Gisserick.
Can I ask a question?
Yes,
Did City Hall actually open for in-person meetings? No? Okay, thank you.
there was some discussion, but as the numbers have been pulled back a little tiny bit. If you're watching the wastewater analysis over the last week, it's gone up 400% presence of viral particles in wastewater. So any other questions, or I'll call the question for a vote. Seeing no other, can we have a on agenda 1, AB 361?
Commissioner Avila is absent. Commissioner Estradas, also absent. Commissioner Grimmick,
Present.
Commissioner Hisarick, Commissioner Cato,
Yes.
Commissioner Kalfani,
Yes.
Commissioner Mandel,
Approve.
Commissioner Pack is absent. Commissioner Shannon is absent. Commissioner Sorota,
Approve.
motion carries.
Thank you. Moving on to the neighborhood council. Do we have anybody from the neighborhood council in the waiting area? Seeing none. Public comment. Do we have anyone in the waiting area for public comment?
Yes, we have one person waiting to make public comment right now.
Excellent. Thank you. Could you let them in?
Yes. Good evening, speaker. You are on the line with the Los Angeles City Health Commission. Caller with phone number ending in 678. Please press *6 to unmute yourself and state your name and the agenda item you are speaking on, please.
I have a feeling, is that Commissioner Estradas on last three digits, 678?
Hello, Rita.
Yes.
Hello, Rita.
Commissioner Estradas? Yes. Can we,
Yes, can you hear me?
yes. Can we switch
Sorry,
Commissioner?
I'm sorry I was muted.
Sorry about that. If we can, please change that number to Commissioner Lorraine Estradas, and if possible, move her to the panelist as well. So we had a quorum actually, probably at the
Yes.
beginning.
Yes, I was on at the beginning.
Oh, great. Thank you. That'll be nice for the minutes. But thank you for being here, Commissioner Estradas. So there's nobody from public comment. Seeing no individuals from the general public, I'll call that for closure. City Clerk has a question.
I just want to thank Commissioner Kalfani. She joined us. She's on sabbatical, but she got the message that we needed a quorum, and she joined. So thank you very much.
We appreciate that, Commissioner Kalfani also. In fact, we appreciate all the commissioners for their volunteer efforts and all the work they do for the city of Los Angeles. So I totally appreciate that personally. And I know that the city and the city council, as well as the mayor, do as well. Let us, as long as we have the quorum, I'll ask for a approval of the minutes from the April meeting.
I'll approve. I make a motion to approve.
So it looks like Commissioner Hisarick approved and Commissioner Grimmig seconded. Any comment or questions about the minutes from the April meeting? Seeing none, can we have a vote on that, please?
Commissioner Avila is absent. Commissioner Estradas,
Yes,
Commissioner Grimmig,
Yes,
Commissioner Hisarick. I think Commissioner Hisarick said yes. Okay. I see him with a thumbs up on the video. Commissioner Cato,
Yes.
Commissioner Kalfani,
Approve.
Commissioner Mandel,
Approve.
Commissioner Pack is absent. Commissioner Shannon is absent. Commissioner Sirota.
Approve.
Thank you. Motion carries.
Thank you. And I'd like to point out, who might not have watched that meeting for the general public out there, it is on YouTube. It was the only time that all the mayoral candidates for election for the mayor of Los Angeles were invited to any forum together. We opened up the discussion of healthcare, as well as this commission, as well as the relationship between the LA City Health Commission and the County of Los Angeles Department of Public Health to all the mayoral candidates. So for all the general public out there, it's on YouTube. You can watch it and watch the whole entire discussion. It was a lively conversation and discussion and very educational. So we invite the general public to either read our minutes from the April meeting, read the entire transcript, or alternatively go on YouTube and watch it. Moving on to the next agenda item, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marian Mass, who's the co-founder of the Practicing Physicians of America, a board member of Free to Care Leadership, of Bucks County Health Improvement Partnership, a delegate to the Pennsylvania Medical Society, and on the editorial board of both the Doylestown Intel and the Bucks County Carrier Times. I had the honor and privilege of working with Dr. Mass for several years on a Physicians Advisory Council to the United States Congress. She is knowledgeable and passionate about both pediatrics and also improving the healthcare of the people of the United States. A pleasure to invite Dr. Mass to present to us on pharmaceutical costs and prices. Dr. Mass, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being here from across the country. I'm here in suburban Philadelphia. I work for Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I don't speak for them when I advocate. We're a big tent here at CHOP. I'm a graduate of Duke University Medical School, and I trained in pediatrics at Northwestern. And I have to say, I really enjoyed Dr. Jackson's talk. It's, asthma is a huge issue, and I'm actively practicing today. If you saw me stand up, you could see my scrubs on because I ran home and pulled the jacket on and didn't get a chance to change out of the scrubs. But I had a shift today, and I see every shift I see kids with asthma. So it's very important. I'm going to try to share my screen. It's something I think it was a teenager in my house that did something to the computer. So I'm having Wi-Fi issues coming on and off. If I get blocked off, I'll come on my phone, and I can do this on my phone. And it's not a problem, but I guess I'll do share screen, and I'll go to my PowerPoint. And yes, so insulin prices and the Affordable Insulin Now Act. You can all see this, yes? Wonderful. And the audio is okay? All right, and then I guess people will be listening by audio. So when I get to the slides that are visual, I'll try to visually describe them, and we'll make it richer, I suppose. But we're all used to Zoom now, aren't we? All right. So some things about diabetes in general. Hold on, we need to go to, let's do slideshow. I think that'll be better. Play from start. Okay. All right, so some statistics about diabetes just in general, and just so that you have some numbers. I mean, we always hear science is about numbers. It was a famous Lord Kelvin quote. You can't have science without numbers. They got to have some numbers. So this is from 2019, the American Diabetes Association statistics. Over 37 million Americans, 11.3% of the population had diabetes in 2019. It's a big deal. The numbers are actually increasing, and we're expecting increases. 29.2% of Americans age 65 and older. So for our Medicare patients, it's a very, very big deal, nearly a third. If we look at the different types of diabetes, type 1, of course, being the kind that you need insulin. You need it to live. There's 1.9 million Americans like that. It's a life-sustaining drug for them because their body doesn't, the islet cells in their pancreas just don't make the insulin. They have to get it extraneously. And we're going to talk about that medication and its cost in a few moments. And of that 1.9 million, 244,000 are children and adolescents that have type 1 diabetes and thus require insulin. I bet every one of you can name a child in your life or a friend in your life that had diabetes when they were young. And I've diagnosed multiple children myself. So it's a big concern. Let me see, next slide. All right. So when we look, there are some deeper statistics about diabetes. There is a disproportionate amount of minorities that are affected. 14.5% of American Indians and Alaskan Natives have diabetes. Of non-Hispanic Blacks, 12.1% are affected. The number is 11.8% for our Hispanic population, 9.5% for Asian Americans, and 7.4% of non-Hispanic whites. So if you look at all minorities, they're disproportionately represented. We're looking at a disease that affects minorities more than it affects our non-minority population. The cost of diabetes. First of all, the cost in life and pain. I'm giving you the death certificates. Sorry, I don't know how that happened. So in 2019, diabetes was the 7th leading cause of death in the United States. 7th. That's pretty big. I mean, I think maybe it will be 8th in 2020 because, COVID came along, but there were over 87,000 death certificates where diabetes was listed as the underlying cause of death. It's a big deal. And, if you think about the pain and suffering that you go through, I think of those children, when you're a small child and all of a sudden you have to sometimes, frequently prick your finger and check your blood sugar if you don't have the diabetes pump yet at that point. It's painful. It's painful to do that all the time. There's a lot of cost to diabetes in terms of pain and suffering. And then if we actually look at the cost, it gets very expensive monetarily wise. And even though that should not be our main concern, we have to address it because of the cost of medication that we're going to talk about in a moment. 327 billion, the total cost of diagnosed diabetes in the United States in 2017. That's the year that we have the most updated statistics for. 327 billion with a B. We all got the B, right? And of that, 237 billion was for direct medical costs, hospitalizations, medications, etc. So on the last day of March in 2022, the news came out that the Affordable Insulin Now Act passed. And since 2018, I've been following drug costs of all sorts and who's causing our high drug costs. I mean, you'd have to be really under a rock to not figure out that our pharmaceutical prices are out of control. I mean, raise your hand if you've heard that drug costs are high in America. Yes? Yes? Anyone? Bueller? Okay, yes, okay. They're high, we know this, right? Thank you, I see you're smiling. I have to keep you awake, that was the later presentation. But so here this act passes and we see headlines everywhere. And we're gonna talk about this act in a couple of minutes after we dissect why insulin is so pricey. But Representative Lloyd Doggett, who voted for this act, actually said on the floor of the House of Representatives that the Affordable Insulin Now Act, quote, does not lower the price of insulin by 1 penny. Wait, isn't this what we were trying to do, was lower the price of insulin? Well, let's take a look at this price of insulin. These are two images here, and for people who are listening and only getting the audio, what we have here is the cost of insulin over time for two different particular companies that make the major insulin that we use in the United States. The graph that we're looking at on the left side of the screen is for Sanofi's product Lantus. And we start in 2012, and you can see the graph tracing out over time that what we call the list price for insulin has gone up by 140%. And the list price for a single vial of insulin, that's what this graph shows, is currently running right now at about $350, $360. That vial, by the way, it costs about $10 to manufacture. The list price is $360. It costs $10 to manufacture. Is something wrong here? Something is very wrong here. My screen may have frozen, so I'm like closing my eyes, but I'm not really closing my eyes, but that's okay. We'll just continue the talking. However, the net price is going down. What is net price? What is list price? And we see the same thing if we look over here for Humalog. We see that the Humalog is, once again, it costs about $10 to manufacture. What we're calling the net price is flat, has gone down slightly, but the list price has gone up, maybe not quite as high as for Sanofi, but this Eli Lilly product of Humalog is also going up, and it's the list price that's high. Well, let me explain the difference for you between net price and list price. This net price that over here on the left side of the screen, that Sanofi, for the Sanofi drug, essentially what the net price is it's what the pharmaceutical company collects. So the pharmaceutical company is collecting about $50 for a drug that costs about $10 to manufacture. So they're getting too much, okay? No argument from me there. However, the list price, this list price is what the pharmaceutical company collects, plus what is commonly referred to as rebates with also some fees thrown in. Well, who's collecting the rebates and fees? Because if you look at this graph, roughly 80% of the cost of insulin is going to the list price, which is coming from rebates and fees. It's the difference between the two lines in the graph. The rebates and the fees, they're collected by, well, not my friends, but sort of someone who's been in my target now since 2018, the PBMs, the pharmaceutical benefit managers. And the same thing is happening over here with the Eli Lilly product, Humalog. Eli Lilly is collecting around about $60 for a vial that should cost about 10. They're collecting more than they should be. However, the list price, the difference, what's going to the PBMs is much more. So if we look at the rise in cost of insulin going up 140%, the major reason for the rise of the cost of insulin, is it the pharmaceutical companies or is it the PBMs? You can say it, someone can say it. It's the PBMs.
Yims.
Yes, thank you, exactly, PBMs. Say it over and over again, start putting it in hashtags. Well, what is a PBM? A pharmacy benefit manager. Some clever people who are doing investigations on them in the state of Ohio call them pirates bilking millions, you know, like, so you can come up with all kinds of clever little things that you can say. A PBM, they are large companies that process and administrate prescription drugs. They also make the formularies. In case you're not familiar, the formulary is the list of what is covered by insurance and other third parties like Medicare and Medicaid. So if formularies have different tiers on their list, so things are covered by higher and lower levels. These PBMs do not manufacture and they don't research. So you don't want to think about people wearing lab coats and, you know, in labs and, you know, doing the work, or you don't want to think about people that are on the lines manufacturing. You want to think about suits. They're writing the contracts. How interesting. One of the things that I found out in medicine that made me drop my jaw, I just couldn't believe it. These PBMs, these people who are making these lists, these formularies, they are allowed to collect kickbacks legally. These rebates are actually kickbacks. How do we know? Because the PBMs have an exemption from the anti-kickback statute. They use the word rebate, but I can assure you that that money is not flowing to the patient. And I can also tell you that these kickbacks, and let's dispense of the word rebate because it's not a rebate, that these kickbacks are not at all transparent unless a pharmaceutical company comes along, like they did in these two cases, and tells us, or unless the PBM would voluntarily say, hey, we're getting this much in the kickback. I also want to point out to you, if you look on the right side of the screen, Eli Lilly has a generic product of Humalog. It's called Lispro, and they put it on the formulary here. And Lispro, even though it is $137 cheaper than the $275 for the branded product, Lispro doesn't make the formulary. In other words, the PBMs are not choosing it for the formulary. And if you look at the graph, you can see why. Because the PBMs are going to make more money off a more expensive drug. They're perversely incentivized to pick a more expensive drug. And by the way, do you think this is happening for just insulin or for nearly every drug in America? I can see Ms. Moreno sitting there nodding her head, and I can see what she's saying. It's nearly every drug in America. This is actually quite shocking. In some conservative studies, we think that the PBMs are collecting 200 to 300 billion per year. They have more revenue streams than just the kickbacks and the fees that they collect, and we won't get into that. If you want to look me up, you can look up America's pharmaceutical middlemen and legal thievery. I've detailed all of their little revenue streams. I've been following these suits for quite a while. I have a lot to say about them. They don't like me very much. So 3 PBMs, it's once again with healthcare, you know, look for the hidden moneymaker, look for the hidden profiteer, the hidden corporation, and also look to see if the business model is corrupted by consolidation, and it is. There are 3 PBMs that control 77% of all prescriptions in America, and I bet you've heard of at least one, if not all 3 of these companies: Optum, CVS Caremark, and Express Scripts. And how interesting, over the last several years, you can pay attention to column 1 here with pharmacy benefit manager and column 3 with insurance company. These insurance companies, they all have their own little personal PBMs, or the PBM has bought the insurance company. Old CVS here in 2018, and I wrote an article on this in the Hill publication, CVS had 62 billion lying around, so they bought Aetna. Who buys an insurance company? And by the way, How do you get so much money to buy an insurance company? If you're CVS Health, you think it's because of all those cute little stores with a fancy little heart on the corners, but it's not. 60% of CVS's revenues come from its PBM. Express Scripts here, they got bought by Cigna. And when Cigna, the insurance company, bought Express Scripts, their revenues tripled. That tells you what you need to know, that these PBMs are the cash cows for the insurance companies. So America complains about its insurance companies, and they are a problem. But now they're consolidated to the pharmacy benefit manager, and the pharmacy benefit manager is highly consolidated. And you can look at this list of insurance companies, and you all know they're highly consolidated too. Everyone's consolidated. It's like they're all up in everyone's business. And then they're running their minute clinics, and they're busy actually buying physician practices, and they have specialty pharmacy for mail out drugs. All kinds of other shenanigans are going on. You have to read real deep. But I want to get back to the Affordable Insulin Now bill. Remember when I told you that Representative Lloyd Doggett, a Democrat from Texas, told us on the House floor, it does not lower the cost of insulin by 1 penny. What does it do? It lowers the copay for Medicare and the commercially insured. That means what you pay out of pocket, and only for Medicare and only for the commercially insured. The uninsured, and there's, I believe over 17,000 of them that have insulin dependent diabetes in America. And that number is going to rise because of the poor health that these, patients suffer under. The uninsured, they're out of luck. They are going to pay that full inflated cost of insulin, that 360, the insurance, the people without insurance at all, the ones that need it the most, they're going to pay the full inflated cost, because the Affordable Insulin Now Act doesn't do a darn thing about the list price. It doesn't lower the cost of insulin. It only lowers the copay. Now let's go back and think what happens. So 60% of Americans receive their insurance through their self-funded employer. So now it's the employer in this case that's going to pay the full inflated cost. Are those employers going to want to pay the full inflated cost? You can shake your head yes or no. No, they're not going to want to. So they're going to pass more of that inflated cost on in higher premiums for their employees. They're going to probably have them pay in other methods. They're probably going to lay off people if they have to keep on paying the 80% cost that's going to the PBMs, and it's inflated way above what it should be. That vial should be costing $10. And by the way, sometimes diabetics go through, 5-6 vials a month. Dr. Mandel, I'm sure you have seen in your practice patients that go through 5-6 vials a month. So now go back to the picture and, you realize that they're paying 350 times 6. This is a real problem here for these patients that depend on this medication for their life. So the employer is going to pay the full inflated cost, or they're going to pay the kickback, but the kickback is still getting paid. The PBM is still getting rich. The insurance company is still getting rich. You're all paying more and you're all getting less. So if you look at Medicare, the Medicare money is going to pay that full inflated cost as well. And that means that functionally your taxes are paying the kickbacks. We're paying for kickbacks. Your taxes are paying for kickbacks. Your employers are paying for kickbacks. Your grandkids are paying for kickbacks. Is there anyone in this room that can tell me why a large company that owns insurance companies and all kinds of other integrated networks, why they deserve the special right to receive legalized kickbacks? Does anyone have a good reason? And please raise your hand, interrupt me, have something to say. I mean, I've been in the halls of Congress, multiple times. I mean, more of us need to call them and tell them that we know about the kickbacks. It's absolutely absurd. And then, once again, back to following the money, we're all going to continue to pay this. And by the way, look at the trajectory. It's going up. And it's not just doing this for insulin, it's doing it for other medications too. They're perversely incentivized to pick the more expensive drug. The rheumatologist friends that I have tell me they're picking the most expensive drug for the rheumatology, issues. They're not picking the drug that works. They're picking the best drug money buys them so that they can keep it all going, flush in cash. Terrible, disgusting, reprehensible. We really need to be doing something. I don't want to make this too long. I will take time for questions. But there is hope. This bill passed and the Senate got to work on it right away. And why? Because I have a lot of emails now. I've been trotting around Congress since 2018 or before 2015. I don't know. I got really active like in 2018. Maybe they like it when they see me coming, but I doubt it. So I got busy and I started emailing the Senate because the Senate's got to do something, right? And not that I know these people in particular, but I certainly know people who can get to these people. Senator Collins, a Republican from Maine, Senator Shaheen, a Democrat from New Hampshire, both senators, and then Representatives DeGette and Reed, who are representatives from the Democrat and Republican party. So this is nice. It's like people playing across the aisle, like we all should be, of course, right? So they are the Diabetes Caucus co-chairs for the Senate and the House. And they are looking at priorities and they were asking for input. Certainly some of the organizations I've worked towards have given them input. And they're looking to lower the insulin costs, and they were inviting lawmakers and other stakeholders to share input on the final legislation. So a part of their policy priorities were ensuring that PBMs cannot collect these rebates. We're putting waivers on deductibles and limiting copays so that the copays were still low, supporting patient access to make sure that prior authorization and other medical management requirements can't be imposed to limit the use of insulin. Just as a little aside here, like for these medications, remember how they make the formularies? If your drug is not on the formulary, even if you're like written for a particular drug, I don't control what you get, what gets covered. It's the PBMs that control it. The suits are controlling it, not the scrubs. The people who were trained to tell you what medication you need to keep your life rolling or to keep you healthy, we don't have the control. These old, PBMs over here that are integrated in with the insurance companies, they're the guys that have the control. All of these pharmacy benefit managers here, not us, and they have it for every other drug. So when they make us do a prior auth, what they're making us do is play like a game of like Mother May I. So the patient gets written the prescription and they come along and they say, no, you can't have this. You have to do a prior auth, and they make you jump through hoops. Physicians, incidentally, are doing like 17 hours a week average doing prior auths. It's another big issue. There's a bipartisan bill on that, but it's a horse of another color. So I think it's absolutely wonderful that people are getting together across the aisle. It's because they know they have to get it done. And frankly, it shouldn't just be in Pennsylvania. It shouldn't just be California. You should be telling all your friends, you need to call your lawmakers and tell them to do something about the PBMs, expose their costs, get rid of their legalized kickbacks. I can think of like fewer people that I'd want to receive kickbacks than the PBMs. They're some of the most untrustworthy companies I've ever read about. So am I riled up and passionate about it? Yeah, I am. Because, I'm tired of patients telling me they can't get their EpiPen, they're too expensive. Their doctor tells them if they don't get the EpiPen, just try to avoid bees. I'm like, really? Avoid bees? Excuse me. Like, we're talking about children here. We're talking about seniors. We're talking about 1.9 million Americans that need and deserve access that's affordable to a drug that should cost $10 a vial, and it's over $350. This is criminal. So I've left a big blank box here, a big black box, just like the big black box of the PBMs, because we can't really see all their money as clearly as we want to. And I'll take some questions.
Wonderful, thank you. Can you stop sharing so that we can see?
Yes.
So let me see. That'll be nicer.
Yep, there we go.
Excellent, thank you.
And let me, if I stop and start my video, then I can come back on usually. There we go.
Perfect, excellent. Well, thank you for a lively and informative discussion. So I'll ask one question, and then I'll open up to the other commissioners and maybe come back and ask another one afterwards. So clearly insulin is something that touches the hearts of the American people, because we all recognize that we know somebody or numerous people that have diabetes, either type 1 juvenile diabetes or type 2, or kind of the hybrid forms of diabetes that exist. And many people are their lives are dependent on insulin, so they have no choice. So it's a way to kind of bring people together in a bipartisan manner to really address the issue. But as you pointed out, the PBM is really the problem. So why doesn't Congress or the Senate deal with just fixing the PBM problem and limiting the amount of money that they jack up the prices and or outlawing the quote rebates / kickbacks. I mean, clearly as a physician, if I paid you, Dr. Mass, or Mr. Vaughn, $1 to send me one patient, or if a patient came in that was referred by either of you, gave you $1 or in fact 50 cents, that would be a felony. We'd both be investigated and or imprisoned. So how is it that Congress has allowed these PBMs to get away with this massive return on their investment?
I think it happens just like many things happen in Washington, D.C. Someone comes along, and at the time it was 2003, and it was the year that the prescription drug Medicare Part D passed. And at the very same year, like sort of stuffed into a little ruling by HHS, they were given the right to receive legalized kickbacks. They actually wafted off of another group that controls the hospital supplies. They're called group purchasing organizations. So 2 or 3 companies control 90% of all hospital and nursing home supplies, and they're the other organizations in America that can also receive legalized kickbacks. It's causing like massive obscene problems. It's why we have supply chain issues. I could talk to you forever about that too, but why won't they do it? Well, if you've ever been to DC, like, and I go with some regularity, I'm going to, I say advocate. I don't call myself a lobbyist. I guess people say I'm lobbying for something, but it's not like I'm going like, you know, doling out checks or, you know, meeting up with that sort of thing. I go to advocate. But there's, you know, you can take a look and you can see at the state legislatures and in Washington, D.C., you know, insurance companies, and now they're part of the PBMs and the PBMs themselves, and the pharmacies. Those big box pharmacies, you know, CVS, you know, Walgreens owns a PBM called Boots Alliance. They're all busy lobbying. If everyone that's part of a big company who has access and has had access for years comes along and is telling you what I call the convenient untruth, it's my own little phrase that I made up, you know, the convenient untruth. This is the best thing to do. This is really a great idea. I mean, I've watched the head lobbyist for the PBMs. I watched him last week. He was on a 3 weeks ago. He was on something with the FTC, and I watched him tell everyone that the PBMs are the only one in the supply chain saving money. Well, they're getting 80% of the cost of insulin, and it works out the same for a lot of other drugs. So why does it keep on happening? I think because the lawmakers have been just listening to the convenient untruth, and it's kind of like what they're used to do. Just like when you and I go to write a prescription, you know, very frequently, like we will give the same number of pills because it's almost like a habit for us, right? Like unless we stop and we think about something. And healthcare is very complicated and convoluted. The other issue is if you think about it, who's making money off of this? The insurance company's making money, the PBM's making money, and there's really 3 big companies that have purchased the right to be the ones to be on the formulary for insulin. So the big pharmaceutical companies, the ones that can afford the kickbacks, they've been making money for a while too. Now they're starting to squawk. Why? Because everyone's blaming them, and they realize, well, we're not making as much as the PBM, so they're busy pointing fingers at each other. You know, here, it's him, it's him, it's him. Meanwhile, like nothing is getting done, right? And notice I didn't tell you the pharmaceutical companies were, you know, completely free of blame. They're making $50 on a drug that should cost 10, so the cost is still too high, right? However, 350 out of the 10 is certainly, you can see where most of the money is going. And this is why they're squawking. They need to be held accountable too. So I'm not just whitewashing the pharmaceutical companies, but the way it's worked for decades, the big pharmaceuticals are making money because they monopolize a product. You know, there's some products where only one company is making it. That's been true of EpiPen, right? Narcan, go look up Narcan. I could get into that one too, but we won't. You know, so the pharmaceutical company's making money, the insurance company's making money, the pharmacy is making money, and there's more money trails there, and the PBM's making money. And all those people have plenty of people to go hire. Did you know that one year CVS hired every lobbyist in the state of California? to shut down anyone else from being able to hire them so they could get what they wanted.
So you mentioned supply chains. We know that prior to COVID and during the COVID pandemic, there have been some supply chain issues with supplies and medications for nursing homes, hospitals, and even for small pharmacies as well. The year prior to that, there was shortages of medicines for pain, for labor. So for epidurals or spinal anesthetics in either outpatient surgical centers, for colonoscopies, and for labor and delivery, there was dramatic shortages where physicians could not use their preferred medication and had to use an older or less effective medication, pain control for women in labor and for outpatient anesthesia. That's all directly related to the manipulation of production by the PBMs. Can you speak to how that's allowed?
Yes. Okay. So what you're referring to is drug shortages. Is anyone in this call, has anyone ever seen the television show MASH? You know, from back in the, okay, yeah. Remember MASH? Remember they had a penicillin shortage and they had to go steal it under the bell? Like, and we're all like sitting there as Americans thinking, this kind of stuff would never happen in America. Well, if you go look up, there's actually a list. If you look up, it's called the American Hospital Society of Pharmacists, I believe. There's a list of drug shortages in America. And there's drugs that flip on and off that list. And at times there's as many as 400 or 500 drugs and solutions that are in shortage. In 2018, there was a hurricane in Puerto Rico and it destroyed the Baxter plant down there. That was the main manufacturer of normal saline. Saline is like sterilized salt water, right? So I wrote a piece for Penn Live a couple of years ago that talked about how during the flu pandemic of 2018, there were patients that were walking into hospitals and they didn't have saline for them. They were given Gatorade. They couldn't put an IV in them because they didn't have the saline. We're talking salt water. Did we catch that? Salt water. And why? Because there was only one company making most of the saline, because just like for pharmaceutical companies to make the formulary as to what drugs get covered, group purchasing organizations make the formulary as to what goes into a hospital. And so you can pay off the group purchasing organization and you can become the sole supplier of a medication or a solution that's in a hospital. So the problem becomes is if you have a disaster like the hurricane, or if you're making a sterile drug that's injectable, you know, like a chemotherapy drug, and those are in shortage all the time. If you look up, you'll see a couple years ago, vincristine was in shortage. I was talking to oncologists who were choosing, should it be the 20-year-old lymphoma patient or the 25-year-old testicular cancer patient that gets the chemotherapeutic? That's sick. That's wrong. But here's what happens. You're the only one making the drug. Something happens on the production line. It takes you a while to fix that. A little particulate matter gets into what should be a clear solution, and you have to shut everything down. Well, if there's not another company making the drug, the supply chain is brittle. And so we've had shortages of all kinds of different drugs. My brother's a cardiologist. I was headed to DC for a trip. I said, any solution, any drug or solution shortages? He said, yeah. He said, I couldn't believe it, Marion. He said, like, you've been doing all this yapping and finally I saw it with my own eyes. Last week, I had a patient that came in and their heart rate was 20. For those of you in the room who don't know, if you're an adult patient, a heart rate of 20 is not sustainable. You'll die. So my brother checks and his acid-base balance was off. So the patient really needed a dose of like bicarb, you know, baking soda, something basic, so that he could restore his pH. All he really needed was a shot in the arm through an IV. And my brother says to the nurse, get me an amp of bicarb. And the nurse says, we don't have any bicarb. My brother's like, it's baking soda water. We don't have any. There's a national shortage. So there's my brother who has to thread a pacing wire. It's a good thing that he's a good cardiologist. He has to thread a pacing wire like down the patient's neck and then into their heart and then pace them out of the low rhythm, which he did. But this patient had now an invasive procedure because they don't have baking soda water. Ridiculous. There's drugs and solutions of all kinds of shortage. There's been epinephrine shortage. Your heart stops and you're in the ER, you need the epinephrine. There's been shortages of Narcan. Go look it up. There's been shortages of glucose. There's been shortages of the medication that you need, Dr. Mandel, to put your patient in labor should she come with very high blood pressure. And, she comes in with the high blood pressure, you have to get her into labor to deliver the baby. Now you don't have the Pitocin, it's been in shortage. So now you have to take her to the OR. And that's a higher risk for that woman and the baby than having her deliver through a vaginal delivery, isn't it? Right. And then you get to the OR and you have to put the spinal in, but you don't have the safest anesthetic for the anesthesiologist, the bupivacaine. And then the baby comes and you might be missing essential elements that you have to give a premature baby, because they have to have like hyperalimentation instead of they can eat right away. You may be missing the drugs and the solutions. Babies often need calcium for cardioprotection. You're missing that. If the baby's heart stops because they come out and the baby's fragile, you might be missing the epi. I mean, it shocks me because we all talk about maternal and infant mortality, especially among women of color in this country. But I'd love, and I've asked people at HHS, could you do a study and figure out if there's shortages that have impacted this? We should all be up in arms over this. Well, I am anyways.
Great.
Sorry
Commissioner,
about the long answer.
Commissioner Hisser, you have a question. We can't hear you, John. Commissioner Hisrick, if you want to, you could
Put it in the chat.
put it in the chat. Do we have a chat operational, at least?
I don't know that we have a chat.
Does he have your, the city clerk's cell, or do we have his?
Yes, and I just emailed him just to find out if he had the right number that he was calling into. Commissioner Hisarick, I emailed you the phone numbers listed on the Zoom meeting invite.
You could also write it on a piece of paper and hold it up. We could go old fashioned.
Let me ask our systems.
Well, we're trying to figure that out because I'd love to have him ask you a question, Dr. Mass.
As long as President Mandel reads the piece of paper so the public can be aware of what's on the piece of paper.
Okay, Commissioner Kato, you have a question.
I think you had to unmute, sir.
No, I'm sorry. I have to leave the meeting at 7:30. So thank you, Dr. Mass.
That's my
for your
pleasure.
presentation. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Hisarick, I believe you can unmute by pressing *6 on your phone.
What I'm being told is that you need to use your participant ID. You call the right number, but you need to use your participant ID. And let me find out if it's the same for everyone or if that is, it's a unique participant ID that is in the email that was sent to you.
Well, Ms. Moreno has my my number if you want to, or my email. You can send the question, or looks like he's texting someone.
I'll say, Dr. Mass, I have a question for you, and
Sure.
it's a question, if I can. The United States' prices are so inflated, but yet some of the same drugs in other countries, say Canada or other places, are so much lower. It seems that way. Maybe I'm wrong in the assessment. In the news I hear is our prices for the same drug are exponentially higher. Is there a reason? Are those countries able to tell those certain companies, okay, we're only going to pay X, and they say, okay, that's fine? Or can you explain that, at least to me, of why other countries get the same drugs, or maybe they're not the same, but they're so much lower?
Okay, well, so it's multifactorial. So the other countries don't have PBMs who make formularies who accept kickbacks. So, and I've told you like 80% of the cost is this. I do think that there is a factor that other countries are negotiating their prices. We talk about doing that in the United States. However, the problem that you get into, I suppose, or like one of the things, the ways that I look at it, that when they set those lower prices, the net price, the pharmaceutical company comes in with that net price, but their net price is probably higher than it should be because other countries have negotiated lower. And I think there's other factors that I'm not even privy to, and I go and I look. I mean, if you look at our pharmaceutical chain right now, a large number of drugs are manufactured in China. There's a woman that's a good friend of mine. Her name is Rosemary Gibson. She wrote a book called China RX. At one point, the United States made most of the active pharmaceutical ingredients. They're called APIs. And now 90% of them are made outside of the United States. And the manufacturing is happening in China. In the last 3 or 4 years, there's been several medications that have been pulled off of there's been recalls on them because they were made in China and they were found to have carcinogens. And we're not talking like rare drugs. We're talking Zantac that a lot of pediatricians give to babies. I'm glad I didn't treat many babies for reflux, unless they were losing weight. But we're talking about the medication called losartan that is one of the most common antihypertensive used. So the manufacturing is happening in China. And so some of the pharmaceutical companies are outsourcing the manufacturing. And I'll get to that question in just a second. So when the medication is made in some of these countries, I'm guessing that they have their own bargaining chip because the manufacturing is happening over there. What I say all the time, reshore the cure, bring it back to here. And there are groups that are doing that. There's a company called Flow, PHLOW. It's out of Richmond, and they're looking to start manufacturing drugs here. I'm sure you've heard of Mark Cuban's work with Cost Plus. And Mark Cuban was very smart because he took out not only the PBMs, but it's complicated, but there's another set called the distributors, and he just knocked them right out, and he's able to immediately, poof, the drug prices are lower for him. Kudos to him. Good for him. So Mr. Hisserish. Okay. How do HMOs, lift it up a little bit more, like Kaiser, something's captivate, negotiate prices? Okay. All right. So you mean Kaiser, the hospital, or so let me do two different things. So, HMOs, health management organizations. As a drug is on the formulary, they'll have their list. And what's the negotiation? I mean, it's the PBM that's setting the list of what's there. So the insurance company previously hired the PBM to create the formularies and to get the rebates, they call them, although the patient never saw the rebates. So I don't know that they negotiate with them now so much because they own each other, right? The insurance companies and the third parties are owning the PBMs. If you were asking about Kaiser, the large hospital group, 90% of all the hospitals in America purchase through a group purchasing organization, also able to create what we would call, I guess, the hospital formulary. And those hospital formularies are set by the GPOs functionally, and the GPOs can accept money from all of the manufacturers of any equipment, devices, medical devices. It's quite a, yeah. I mean, if you throw in the GPO kickbacks, which were set up in 1987 by Congress and passed and stuffed into the Medicaid Patient Protection Act, their anti-kickback exemption in 1987, you total that plus the PBM kickbacks, and some people think it's like $400 billion a year. I think with that kind of thing, you could help cure Alzheimer's and AIDS and lots of cancers all at once. It's a moonshot.
Approximately $100 billion was enough to basically give every uninsured American access to healthcare with a good kind of a mid-sized bronze plan would be 100 billion. So 400 billion of excess costs in the system, basically in a nutshell, is being pulled right out of other things that we could be doing for either healthcare or social work or supportive care or
mental health. Hello, mental health. We're bleeding money and we're losing minds.
So most of those funds are going, and again, I think that Dr. Mass pointed out that basically three PBMs have 77% of the market. If you throw in a fourth, you're up to 85%, and if you go to the fifth, You're like 93% of every drug in America is going through those PBMs. The PBOs also is a limited number of PBOs that have their grips on this, and one could argue that they're not supply chain; they're actually manipulating the market, and the economic term is oligospony, which is if you limit the number of purchases, then there's restraint of trade, and there's no law against oligosponies. There's only a law against monopolies or oligopolies. Commissioner Hisserick, did you want to try to ask another question? If not, are there any other commissioners that have a question?
I do, President Mandel. This is Lorraine Estradas.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner Estradas. The floor is yours.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Mez, for a very informative presentation. And honestly, I was shocked. I did not know about these PBMs and then being exempt from rebates. So, I work at a federally qualified community health center. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but we're designated over 50 years ago to serve the federally designated medically underserved communities and health manpower shortage areas. We serve the populations you described earlier in the presentation. And I want to know, what can we do to help you? And thank you so much for your advocacy, your perseverance, and your commitment. What can we do as commissioners, as individuals, to help you in your journey of advocacy? We, community health centers, by the way, are members of a National Association of Community Health Centers that also works with advocacy. Something, we can contact lawmakers to help with the work you're doing, to share input on legislation, to ensure that these PBMs cannot collect and should not be exempt from these rebates. So what can we do to help you with your advocacy? Because I think through our national association, that's one way that we could help. If we could get more information from you, I don't know if you're familiar with us, because we do advocacy at the national level.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful.
And if there's any other ways that we can do to help you and work with you.
Well, yes, no, I think there's something like 14,000 federally qualified healthcare centers in the United States. They're very important places for people to go, who can't get care otherwise. And the FQHCs get medications through the 340B program at a greatly reduced rate. So that helps them, which is a wonderful thing. I think that one of the things that you could point out in your advocacy and an angle that would be very helpful would be pointing out that if the rest of the country could be freeing up what they're paying, maybe for the patients that have less, your FQHCs, they might be able to get more help. Like I always say to people, if we paid what really was of value in healthcare, we'd have plenty of money to take care of what people really need. Like I know people discuss, healthcare as a right or a privilege. I don't like to use either of those words. I use the word need. Healthcare is a need. And, of course, for some, it's an immediate need, like if you have cancer and so on and so forth, or if you have diabetes, certainly. But I think for making sure that we get people what we need, I think very pragmatically, we should start with that. As far as what you could do particularly, I'd be more than happy to talk to a group of people. I would give the same presentation. I hope it was short enough and clear enough and people understood it well enough. So I'd be more than happy. I know that both Dr. Mandel and Ms. Moreno have my contact information, and I believe Mr. Chowdhury as well. Chowdhury, I hope I said that right. And I'm happy to speak to you. I think as you're advocating on the national level, what you should be saying to your lawmakers is, are we reducing healthcare costs in every sector like we should? Because I keep on hearing about companies that are making money that are making more than they should be. It concerns me greatly that it seems as though that there's a lot of vultures in here, bellying up to the healthcare pie and getting themselves a big, fat, juicy piece, and that's got to stop. So I have more than one article out there. I try to write simply to explain this in a way that the general public can understand, because I'll be honest with you, when I discovered this, it took me like 2 or 3 months to figure it out because I couldn't find anything written on it. And it just didn't make sense to me. And then I had to figure out how I could explain it simply and effectively. I think I've gotten good enough at that. So I'm happy to come and talk to your group. But I think you have a great angle because you do serve, your larger group serves, 14,000 centers. You're getting to a lot of people and a lot of people that
Yes.
really have needs. So does that answer?
Okay, great. Yes, yes, thank you.
Any other commissioners? Seeing none, I'll ask one more question, Dr. Mass. Are you familiar with any either city or locality that has attempted to limit the PBMs within their jurisdiction?
Yes, I have. So there's another solution to this. And like some of the people I know that do this, they say, if you want to pay less for healthcare, just pay less for healthcare. So in my own school district, so my children go to public school here in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. The last one is about to graduate. I'm about to become an empty nester. I can't believe it. So the school board president had been reading some of my stuff, and she went and she looked at the cost of medications for our school district. We're the third largest school district in Pennsylvania. So it's like Philadelphia, then Pittsburgh, and then us. So it's a lot of people. I mean, I can't remember how many students, but we have a lot of employees. And she said that like the drug costs, the prescription drug costs for the employees in our school district is huge. So they looked into it and they found a transparent PBM that was a pass-through, not one of the big ones. They fired CVS and they were saving over $1 million a year. There's a county that's one county north of me, Lehigh County. It's where Bethlehem Steel is, Allentown, the steel stacks. So the controller of Lehigh County discovered the same thing. It was fascinating. There's a podcast on this. I can send it along. But he discovered that the county was overpaying on these prescriptions, and he just details the same thing, that his employees at the county were getting medications that were very expensive medications. They could have been getting less expensive medications, and I forget who they fired, but they hired a small pass-through PBM that they helped create the formularies. They did the work to pay the pharmacies, so the pharmacies got paid. They did the work to adjudicate the prescriptions, took a small fee for adjudicating the prescriptions, but then they didn't take the big fat kickbacks. Essentially, bottom line, cut out the fat cats, no disrespect to cats. This is just really terrible. I can see you smiling, Ms. Moreno.
So theoretically, the county of Los Angeles, 0.2 people representing this population could theoretically pass a law that limited the PBMs from taking multiples of the price that they're being charged by the pharmaceutical company. So if, for example, for diabetes, for insulin, if one company was manufacturing a drug and selling it at $40 to the PBM, that the PBM could only charge limited 10% or 20% above that, and there would not be any kickbacks allowed. Is that allowed from your understanding of the law?
So I guess like in terms of a city or a municipality, I just think your best bet is to go with a transparent pass-through. I mean, so like the best thing to happen would be just get rid of the kickbacks. Why should we have the kickbacks anyway? Sorry, I'm going to start and stop my video because it keeps on going out. You have to keep in mind that the PBMs find other revenue streams. For instance, there's something at the state level called the spread. Have you heard of the spread? Okay.
No.
So what the PBMs do is they get paid the money by the insurance companies to pay off the pharmacies because the big PBMs have been administrating the Medicaid prescription plans too, right? So in the Medicaid market, what these PBMs are doing is they're just helping themselves. They're just keeping a portion instead of paying it to the pharmacies, right? And so like in Ohio, they've been like the best investigators on this. The Columbus Dispatch has been on the PBMs like worse than me. Like they probably hate Ohio more than they hate me. But they were found 224 million per year in the state of Ohio alone. They were helping themselves to this money that was supposed to be used by the Medicaid program to pay the pharmacies. And of course, if you think about it and you go back to that slide that I showed you, you know, CVS and Walgreens and so on and so forth, which pharmacies do you think they're going to hold back the money on? They're going to hold back on the independents so that they can, you know, they'll pay their own guys more and then they can knock the independents out of business. As far as a state municipality doing something, I would think the only thing that they could do would be to hire an independent pass-through PBM. They exist. There's 70 PBMs in the country. It's just that, you know, 3 of them have almost all the business, and when you get to 6, it's 95%. You know, there's people that recognize that the use of a PBM to adjudicate prescriptions and do the bit of administration is needed. It's just that we certainly don't need the kickbacks. We certainly don't need the profiteering. We don't need them robbing Medicaid, for the love of God. There's like 3 or 4 other like ways that they make money. That's kind of, you know, shocking. Like I said, there's articles. I can send them along to someone at some point. I could send you.
We would love that. Yeah, if you could send those articles as
Of course.
to our research associates, we'll definitely disperse it to all the commissioners. We'd really appreciate that.
Of course.
Any other commissioners have a question for Dr. Mass? Seeing none, Dr. Mass, we're thrilled that you came to us. We recognize that you're 3 hours later than we are. And we love the fact that in addition to getting up early and working a full day at the one of the finest children's hospitals in America, CHOP, that you then take time off from your busy schedule to present to this commission as well as the people of Los Angeles.
That's okay.
And on a personal note, it's nice to see your face again after so many years. I'm truly appreciative of your efforts on behalf of American people in the halls of Congress, and the kids in Pennsylvania, and educating the people in Los Angeles. Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I am going to dash off and get to bed. And I'll be happy to send along some articles. And if there's any particular questions, or if Commissioner Stratas wanted to connect at some point, I'm happy to do so. I'll find the time. So we'll make it happen. You know, you all
Thank you
take
very
care.
much. Great, thank you.
Okay, take care.
Moving on to the next agenda item, which is other ideas or new business. Commissioner seeing none. City Clerk has a question.
So just wanted to let you know, this is a little bit of a longer month. So in the event that we still have AB 361 that we need to make the determination again before those 30 days are up, the commission should look at meeting, having a special meeting just for that purpose only, either Monday, June the 6th, Tuesday, June the 7th, or Wednesday, June the 8th. That would be the 28th, 29th, and 30th day prior to the expiration of the 30 days that were just approved today.
Is June 6th? I don't have a calendar in front of me. Is that a Monday?
That is a Monday.
Could we have our regular meeting? What's the league? Could we have a regular meeting on the 6th?
We could, but then we would just again be 1 week short for the month of June as well. It's just you know, the way the weeks work. We have 31 days. Anyhow, so it's up to you. If you want to, we can poll the commissioners to see when everyone's available. You could have a special meeting in June, the 6th, but then we would look at either having a special meeting for this one purpose, or having another special meeting in July. Actually, no, we can't. That would be July 4th. So if we hold a special meeting on June 6th, the commission would have to meet July 5, July 6 to make those that 30-day requirement, which might be a little bit more difficult. I don't know, after the 4th of July holiday. I don't know how you what you think about that.
And again, I don't have a calendar for me. Is July 5th is what day?
July the 4th would be the next 4-week interval. And that's obviously a holiday. That's a Monday, July the 4th. And then there's Tuesday, July the 5th, Wednesday, July the 6th.
Yeah, I would suggest try to do 6 for the regular meeting, if we could, and not have the extra meeting, and then have a meeting on either the 5th or the 6th, depending on how many commissioners can join us, and have that be a regular meeting. And if you could poll commissioners electronically, so that we have hopefully the largest number of individuals, and then we could work on having our speakers on June 6th. I think we could be able to do that.
Okay, I will do that.
Excellent, thank you. Any other commissioners have a comment or suggestion for speakers? You're always welcome to email myself or any of the associates. Sorry, Commissioner Hisarick. What we should do prior to the next meeting, in case there's technical problems, is have your cell, and you could either text me and I could be your voice, or we'll check with the city attorney. If not, he or the city clerk could be your voice, so that we could be in compliance with the law. And the other possibility is to seeing if you can be able to type in and just have somehow it posted in chat. City clerk, you have a comment or statement?
Yeah, so I was checking with our systems folks, and it appears that they disabled the chat for all of our meetings that we're hosting because the chat becomes a public record. And that's why we don't have access to that. If that is something that the commission wants to have available, I can talk to our systems folks. I'm not sure if it's ITA or who has to enable that. The other thing is that I've asked our system staff if offline, after tonight, we can call Commissioner Hisarick and try to figure out what the audio problem is.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Thank you. Yeah, I would say, to allow the chat, and we'll only use it in case of technical issues. We're comfortable with it being part of the public record. It's somebody asking a question that they'd be asking verbally anyway. So it's going to be down on the transcripts anyway. So I don't see a problem with that. This commission doesn't have a lot of sidebar conversations, so nobody will use the chat for anything other than public business. I would, if we can get it reinstituted, I'd appreciate that. Cool. Seeing no other issues, is there a motion for adjournment?
Yes, I make a motion to adjourn.
Right, so Commissioner Hisarick waved first, his thumbs up, and Commissioner Sirota seconded it. All in favor of aye?
Aye.
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 Any abstentions?
Aye.
Seeing no abstentions, seeing no nays, officially we're adjourned. I wish everybody a wonderful Memorial Day holiday And in regards to families who are impacted by lost relatives or family members anytime in any war defending our great nation, our prayers are with you on Memorial Day as well. We're adjourned.
Thank you.
And thanks again
Thank you.
to the research associates and intern for the hard work. I don't see that she's on, but we congratulate our intern from graduating the Viewpoint School and applaud her for being accepted to Duke University, which she'll be attending and matriculating in this fall. Well, officially for the record,